Salut, c'est Marie de Just French It. Now, today we have to talk about something because I realized that lots of people don't really understand this. Culture. You have heard it before and probably many times, especially by teachers. Well, teachers are telling you that anyway. They keep telling you need to learn about French culture as well as French grammar and vocabulary. And I've done that myself, and I've told you several times that learning about French culture is a way to really deeply understand the French language, right? So this, when teachers are telling you that, they're definitely not wrong. Understanding French culture is going to help you speak French much more efficiently, communicate with French people much more efficiently, actually. Because culture is what all French people have in common, in a way, right? So when you hear that, you learn about the traditions of France and maybe about French food, French dishes, and boom, easy, right? You've learned about French culture. But you might have also realized that learning about this doesn't really influence your French at all. That's because what you've learned, what you consider being French culture, is not the important part of French culture. It's not really what teachers and what I mean when I tell you to learn about French culture. So while I'm telling you what French culture actually is, what I want you to do is to check the description of this podcast and click on the link that says Take Your French to the Next Level. This link is going to be your first step to understanding French and French culture. So do that, and I'm going to tell you why your French hasn't improved when you've learned about French food and traditions. Well, it's because French culture is not just that. The big question is, what is culture? Well, big philosophical question. But we're not doing an essay, so don't worry, I'm not going to answer that, in philosophical terms. Traditions, dances, dishes, food is, yes, part of the French culture. And yes, knowing a bit about this is also useful because you can use that as a topic for talking with French people. But there's something that is even more important that is going to help you much more. And those two things actually are learning about French values and French ideas. The way French people react to certain values, to certain ideas, is what you want to understand. Knowing about this is going to help you come in contact for real with French people. Not in this very artificial way of that most conversation happen to be in now, but a true connection. Because if you realize, if you think that the way you act is weird, the way French people react to what you're saying is weird, it's probably because somehow you are either offending them, you talked about something taboo, or you did something too much. It's too much for their conception, their idea of what a first conversation should be like. Or maybe you said something that really goes against the values and ideas shared by most French people. A very typical example is when you first meet a French person, they tend to be reserved and distant at first, and that's what you think we are like. And this is where the stereotype French people are rude come from. But that's only because we are not used to share a lot with strangers. But once you know a French person, on the other hand, once you get to know them, once you pass that stage, you have talked with them a few times, you shared a laugh or two, well, we are much more open and we are very friendly. In general, again, there are those kind of people everywhere, but If a French person is really friendly with you, it probably means that she or he considers that you are his or her friend. And we take friendship very seriously. So this, conception of human interaction is a bit opposed to the American way of being friendly to strangers and a bit harder to become true friends with. I don't remember who first talked about this, but there's this image that French people are coconuts. They're hard to crack, but they are soft in the middle. And Americans are peaches. They are soft on the outside with a hard pit. So, now that you know that, instead of learning about dishes and traditions, here's what you can do to learn about French culture, because, how can you learn about that? It's not like people are writing, essays and books about that. Not really. It's not something you can really explain. You have to feel it. So how you are going to learn about it is with immersion, some sort of immersion. Because immersion doesn't have to be a thing you do abroad. You can create small immersions into the French culture in your everyday life without leaving your country. You can do that with movies, with books, with the internet, with videos. So to learn about French culture, you need to look at what it is like to live in France. What are French people like? For that, you can watch a few French movies, and there's a list for you in the description. You can read books, and there's another list for you on Just French It. Another thing you can do is check the news in French. You can do that very easily on Google News by switching your setting to France and French. Even just reading the titles of the news, you'll see how French people react to what's happening in the world. You'll see that how French people actually think, what is actually on the mind of French people. And that can actually be a very weird realization for you. I know that it was for me when I left for Ireland. I did the switch. I switched my Google News to Ireland and English. And, well, that was very eye-opening to see that what was actually important in the eyes of the media in Ireland told me a lot about the Irish society. Ireland and France have two very distinct ways to react to the same events. This actually, and doing this is actually going to give you a unique perspective on your own culture. And finally, the last thing that I'm going to advise you to do is to follow a few French YouTubers. That helps to have another point of view. You have the point of view of the media, the point of view of the people who are, making movies, because generally it's more the point of view of the director or of the writers, of the writers or the producers, etc., than the true reality. I mean, there's a fondment of truth there, but, when it comes to French YouTuber, you can actually watch people from all kinds of backgrounds with all kinds of identities as well. And so that's a very good point of view to have when you want to learn more about French culture. And for a list of French YouTubers, there's a link for you in the description as well. So there's a list of movies, there's a list of books, and there's a list of French YouTubers. So, okay, I've talked for almost 8 minutes so far. And what do you really need to take out of this podcast? Well, you really need to remember from this that learning about French culture is not learning about French dishes and traditions. It's learning about values and ideas. And that you can do that very easily by immersing yourself in France and in French, or in your own country by watching movies, videos, reading books and the news in French. Now, if you want to do that, and if you want to also take your French to the next level, there's a link for you in the description of this podcast. And I'll be in your inbox in 5 minutes if you click on this link. So I'll see you there.